Hello everybody, this is Dr. Novak. In this video I'm going to talk about CO2 distributing systems and what I found out of different ways of doing it and better ways of doing it, and that's coming up next in this video, so stay tuned. CO2 distributing systems. There's all kinds of ways that you can inject CO2 into the aquarium. Watch some videos myself, and one thing that I noticed, people aren't completely being, what should I say, 100% forthcoming on telling you exactly what is going on. For example, we have two ways you can distribute CO2. One is through the fluvo CO2. These you can buy at any PetSmart, at Pepco. You connect up the air line up to here, and it's just a ceramic stone that distributes small bubbles into your aquarium. You can also use a E-Heim bubbler, and these can be adjusted to have very small bubbles come out of the E-Heim bubblers, and it will do the same thing as this. There's another thing I did a video on, which is this, and this just hangs on the tank and goes inside your tank. Once again, it's ceramic, and these create the small bubbles for your CO2. Now each one of these have a different application on how big you will need. This is an inch in diameter. The other one is even smaller for the fluval one. That's about a ½ inch in diameter. Maybe, let me see. Yeah, maybe about a ½ inch, maybe larger, maybe 5/8 in diameter. This one's going to be an inch in diameter, so you're going to get more bubbles out of here than out of this one. Okay, but each one has its place in our aquariums, and how efficiently does the CO2 distribute in our aquariums is going to depend on how many bubbles per second you're going to give your bubble counter, and how much CO2 can come out of here. What happens with these is if you try to increase your CO2 with more bubbles, they're only going to go so fast. In other words, pressure is going to start building up. You can blow off the lines, and they are eventually going to clog, which means that when they do clog, you have to pull them out, and this one just unscrews, and you'll have to pull the ceramic disc out like this one, and you'll have to clean this with bleach. You put a new ceramic disc in, put it back together. The same thing as the fluval, comes apart, and that's it. And then you just hang it back and let the CO2 with micro bubbles come out. Now each one of these have a place in the aquarium, and each one of these will definitely do the hobbyist good, depending on how much CO2 you need in your aquarium, how big it is, how many plants you got. But for a lot of people, when they start getting into bigger aquariums, like your 55 gallons, your 75 gallons, your 90 gallons, 125 gallons, these sometimes can't do it. They have micro bubbles, and they won't bring the CO2 high enough. And if you try to add more bubbles per second, what happens, like I said, is the airline can blow up, because these create a lot of back pressure. They're not like a normal air stone, which has very large bubbles. This is micro bubbles, very, very small. And that's so the CO2, as it rises, the CO2 will be gassed off into the water before it reaches the atmosphere, and only oxygen will be sent into the atmosphere, and the CO2 will impregnate the aquarium water. We're trying to do it the most efficient way as possible. Another way of doing all this is by buying one of these. Now the CO2 line comes into here. This connects up to the outtake of your canister filter, and it looks like it's for 5/8 tubing. You can get them for 1/2-inch tubing or 5/8. This would be 5/8. You have to cut your line, you put it on here, here, and then the CO2 is injected into here, and then basically what this has is a ceramic stone in here that that creates micro bubbles, and then the pump will just push those micro bubbles into the aquarium and distribute the bubbles better than something like this will do. Okay, the trouble is with these, once again, they clog. And there's only so much CO2 they're going to distribute out of them, and that's it. Because they are using a ceramic stone, and they're going to create a back pressure that can blow your lines off if you need that much. Now, I just saw a video on something like this, and they make the claim that that it really doesn't make a lot of CO2 bubbles in the aquarium. And then the guy kind of said, oh, but that depends on how many bubbles per second. Well, this is no different than a ceramic stone. The only difference between this and this is this is going to connect up to your filter, canister filter, and it's just going to blow it out throughout the tank. And if you don't want that 7-Up look, well, you're going to get it. So the guy in the video who explains it doesn't really do it, well, that's not true. It's going to give you that 7-Up look in your aquarium. And it's hard to get away from such a effect in your aquarium by not having the small little CO2 bubbles in the aquarium. It's very hard to try to get rid of that. Okay, they have all kinds of other ways of CO2 that have bubbles that go in a circle. They try to keep the bubble exposed to the water as long as possible. There's also another thing I did a video on several years ago, and there's also a product like this called Turbo 600. This is a Turbo 600. It comes in 200 and 400. So it will depend on the size of the CO2 mixer. And what happens is you put your CO2 hose up to here, and it doesn't use a ceramic air stone. So there's no back pressure. There's zero back pressure going on to your CO2 lines or anything else. It goes in here, the bubbles go in, there's an impeller in here, almost works on the same principle as a protein skimmer with a needle valve. Okay, what it does, it takes the CO2, it chops it up, it spins it around inside here. That's why it's called a turbo, because it spins the water and CO2 around, and the oxygen is released and the CO2 impregnates the water. It then brings in new water, squirts out that impregnated water, and it does the whole cycle over again. This also doesn't guarantee that you're not going to get those micro bubbles, because it does create micro bubbles. Okay, because it takes something that's a big bubble and turns it into a very small micro bubble, just as small as these ceramics do. The only difference is something like this uses electricity. The ceramic air stones or CO2 stones don't. The first question that's usually asked on these, and they have videos on them, so you can just type in one of these and it'll show you how it works. First question that's always asked is, how loud are they? Depending on, once again, how many bubbles per second you're going to put into one of these is how loud it's going to be. It doesn't matter. They're not really very loud unless you put a lot of bubbles in, and I'm talking about 5 bubbles per second or even higher. Then they will make more noise than if you only put 2 bubbles or 3 bubbles per second. They come in black, so they kind of hide. On my tank, you don't even see it unless you go on the side, then you see it. Otherwise, they because of their coloring, and this is clear. So it sucks up water from the bottom. CO2 comes in, the impeller just keeps mixing it. This one, you have a little adjustment on how much CO2 and water mix you want. And the turbo 400 and 600. Now what this means is that's 600 liters per hour. The 400 is 400 liters per hour, and the 200 is 200 liters per hour. Something like this, like the 600, would be good for 55 gallon, 75 gallon, 90 gallon, like I have, 125 gallon. This is what this is going to be for. Okay, this could be put into a sump right next to your pump in your sump, or this could be placed inside the aquarium itself in some spot where you're not really going to see it. And my tank, like I said, if you're looking at the tank directly front, you don't even see it. It does make a little bit of noise because it is beating up and breaking up the CO2 bubbles that are in there. The disadvantage is it's got to be plugged in, but it uses very little electric consumption. I think it's something like 4 or 5 watts of power, very little consumption to something like this. And it does the job of impregnating the water better than this. Okay, which a lot of people will say, oh, this does a good job. But basically all this is doing is pumping CO2 in here. There's a ceramic stone in here, makes micro bubbles, and all the aquarium pump is pumping and sending those bubbles all over your aquarium to give them a longer time of exposure to the aquarium water, where this is literally taking the bubbles in, bigger bubbles, beating them up, pulverizing them until little bitty micro bubbles. So all you have left is the oxygen, and the CO2 itself is being distributed with the aquarium water. So this works a little different. Now, I did do a video on how to make one of these, or you can just buy one, and they do work. Okay, first of all, they work very, very well. And if you are one of those hobbyists who have an aquarium, you're having trouble with your CO2. In other words, it seems like the air stones that you are using, or the CO2 stones, ceramic stones you're using, aren't quite doing the job. No matter how many bubbles you seem to turn it up to, it doesn't quite do the job raising the CO2 level up. These usually do good on small tanks, but on larger tanks, they don't seem to be able to put enough CO2 in the water. So you're going to need something either like this or some way of distributing the CO2 a little better. That 7-Up look is just something that you are going to have to put up with. It's very hard to get rid of that. And I've used these, I bet you, for close to 10 years. These. And since the 90s, I've been doing planted aquariums and never could get rid of the 7-Up look. Those little micro bubbles all over your aquarium. That's just the nature of the beast. So if you're finally going to throw in the towel and say, I had enough of this, I had enough of these, had enough of this, or I don't want to go this route, because all it basically is this, and then you're just having a pump blow the CO2. That's all this is. It's not stirring anything up. It's not going through an impeller. They do have products that will do that, but basically that's all it is you might as well have one of these and then have a pump take it and blow it out into the aquarium. Because basically that's all this is. It's just taking your water, going in here, exiting with all the CO2 bubbles, and blowing it all over your aquarium. And that's really it. This is different because this is literally chopping up the CO2 and mixing it like a mixer does. Look at it that way. It's like a blender. So it's literally blending brand new water with the CO2 and then distributing that water back into the aquarium. And then the microbubbles that are left will go to the surface. So this is a lot more efficient for the price than any one of the other methods that I just shown you. So if you are looking for a better CO2 distribution system, I should say, this would be a better choice. Definitely this is going to do a lot better than even this is going to do. Okay, this is not going to compete with this, because this is not chopping the bubbles up and literally mixing them up with the aquarium water and impregnating the water with CO2. Okay, this does not. So that ought to be made very clear. Another thing I want to bring up, I'll show you a close-up of this section. I showed you a few pictures up here. I think the last time I did a video I talked about trapdoor snails. The beard algae that was here, I'll show you a picture, a close-up of this. It's all gone. It's 100% gone. The trapdoor snails, which are here in the back there, they have taken care of all the beard algae. Now, I wanted to bring this up because I hear a lot of different fish and things that they say will eat beard algae. Beard algae seems to be a problem with aquariums that people don't like. They seem to get it, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to get rid of it. And especially something like this where you have 15 hours a day at full blast, the light going. So these snails will definitely take care of it. And I'll show you a close-up. It's gone. They ate it all up. And this is something I think that it's the only animal that I can honestly tell you that I know 100% will take care of beard algae. I've heard of different Plecostomus and things like this, and I don't recommend those because I've had beard algae and they wouldn't touch it. They would touch other algae before they would touch the beard algae. And most of the time they wouldn't touch the beard algae because if they had something else to eat on, they would go do that than the beard algae. So if you do have a beard algae problem, or even if you have some of these algae that may be like a real dark maroon, it's a tiny algae, grows on your rocks and stuff like that. Once again, the trapdoor snail eats that. It's the only animal I know that you can put in your aquarium that will eat all those algae up. I don't know why it's not as popular, maybe because it is a snail and people just don't want snails. But compared to the other snail like you see here, which is the mystery snail, these snails, the trapdoor snails, as you see here, they're really kind of neat. They have like a bluish green shell. Some of them do, some of them have black shells. And they don't cost any more than the mystery snails. The thing about it is they're not going to overrun the tank because they're a live-bearing snail and they only have about 1 or 2 little snails. They don't have like a hole full of eggs that they'll lay up at the top and where you can get 30, 40, 50 snails. They don't do that. And they only make maybe once or twice a year. That's it. So you're not going to get an overabundance of these trapdoor snails overpopulating your aquarium. But you can go on the internet and you can buy the trapdoor snails. Like I said, it's about 10 of them for 30 bucks. Sometimes you can get, it depends on the price. Some of the prices are kind of outrageous for these snails, but they shouldn't really be that expensive. And they come through the United Post Office Service. So anyway, I did want to, I'll show you a picture of this. As far as the aquarium itself is going now for 2 months. It's doing fine. There's another thing I wanted to bring up that I think you should know if you made it through this long. I did a little modification to the wear of my 90-gallon tank. It had a big 1-inch pipe for an outtake of the pump. And there's no reason to have a 1-inch pipe and then it goes into 1/2-inch piping to go into the aquarium. And there's no reason for your pump to move all that water through a 1-inch pipe and then be restricted to a 1/2-inch ID orifice going into the aquarium. That's just going to make more back pressure for your pump. So I decided to change that with cold water piping, and I used 7/8, which the ID of 7/8 is going to be bigger than the ID of 1/2-inch white PVC pipe. So anyhow, I took the canister and I pulled all the piping off and I ran it without going into the aquarium on the 90-gallon tank. I just ran it, so all it did was circulate the water in the weir, which is about 2.5 gallons of water. So it was circulating the water only in the weir and not doing the canister, because it's going to take me at least 3 hours to go to the hardware store, pick up all the piping, the fittings I need, to spray everything, to drill what I need to make the modifications to use the 7/8 cold water piping versus the white PVC piping that we normally would use. So I cut that down to 7/8. It gives me more room in the weir to put things instead of that real thick piping that's the 1-inch. Anyhow, plus it'll give me a bigger orifice going out into the tank besides the 1/2-inch hole that's in the 1/2-inch piping that you can buy. So after running this at least 3 hours in the weir, because now all it's doing is blowing out of one of the holes and the other 2 holes are sucking in. There's no water going into the aquarium. It's just recycling the water in the weir, okay? Because I recalibrated the Redox probe and the probe for the pH, so I'm monitoring the pH, I'm monitoring the Redox. And the thing about it is, the canister filter, the 88 canister filter, hasn't been cleaned in over a month. And here it is recirculating the water. And I noticed the redox was up to 110, 115. Now, even though the canister is over a month old, okay, and been running for well over a month, so it's dirty, it's filthy, you know, a lot of people say, oh, I clean my canisters once a month. It still had a redox of over 100, 310 to 315, and that's just the canister, because right now the aquarium runs anywhere between 350 to 375, depending on the time of day. Are you using CO2? Are you not using CO2? But I thought that was interesting. I thought you'd be interested in it because no one ever tells the hobbyists what is going on inside your canister. If you have a canister and it's running over 315 redox, you don't need to clean it. I mean, that's a lot of oxidation it's doing. Remember, 250 is freshwater systems, 375 is saltwater system. This is what Mother Earth is. 250 usually for freshwater, 375 for our oceans. That's what the redox is. You're putting out a canister filter that's been running over a month, over 310 to 315 millivolts. You have a lot of oxidization happening with that canister. So there's no reason to break it down. There's no reason to waste your time. There's no reason to replace anything. It's doing its job. Now, in case you're not familiar with the ADA filter that's being used on there, it's basically an ADA filter is like a Eheim plastic. It's just made out of metal. It's basically the same thing, okay? Because Eheim came out way, way before ADA did. And that's the same way with the F-Zone stainless steel filter. It's basically an Eheim plastic. And that has a BCB basket in it that's over going on 10 months old. So it's a well-mature BCB basket in there. And I've shown videos, watch some of my old videos if you want more information, like what is I'm talking about if you're the first time here. And you'll see how I made up the BCB, how I stack that particular filter, and how the filter is showing me that you don't have to change me. I could be dirty. Yeah, it could be dirty. But actually it has a lot of oxidizers in there, which are breaking down and utilizing the pollution that's in the tank. And oxidizers are going to break down your ammonia, your nitrites, your nitrates, your phosphates. These oxidizers are going to break down waste, leaves, everything that comes into the aquarium. The insalts that come in here are going to be oxidized by these oxidizers, and it's going to break them down into less harmful byproducts. So in that tank, if you remember, I think I did a nitrate test kit on it. It was a 0.06 or 0.08, something like that, were the nitrates, and that's extremely low. And that's what you can expect from a BCB basket or using a plenum. And as we can see with this, and I'll show you a picture of another fellow's tank who just made a tank, goldfish tank, using a plenum, and I'll show you his tank. He did the same thing. And he has a very long, it looks like it could be an aranda. I'll have to look at the picture. And it's a very long fin aranda. And these usually have a tendency to get blood streaks in their fins if the tank isn't going right. But as you can see here, the plants are doing great. I've had to thin out the plants. Some plants here, some of the plants used to have algae on them, and it's gone. So as the tank is breaking in, the algae problems are going away. And of course, always attack your algae problems with the right animals that will take care of the algae which you wish to get rid of. There's another thing I wanted to bring up. I don't mind showing close-ups of my aquarium, but I noticed something that a lot of these people do videos, they don't show you a close-up of their aquarium. Have you noticed that? They always show you something that's far away. And when they did show you a close-up, you'll see this hair algae flowing off the plants. You'll see blackbeard algae. From a distance, it looks good. And then they tell you, oh, the tank is doing great. But I'm not scared to show people up close any of the plants or anything else and let you know exactly what is going on. When you take a look at this section here, and I'm going to show you a close-up of it, and you see the other pictures I will show you, it's like night and day. The wood actually is, now I'm looking at the entire wood, the wood's down to wood. You know, all the algae that was growing when the tank was first set up and you had that algae bloom, it's all gone. And that could be contribute to the snails. I'm using 2 different kinds of snails in this aquarium. And because in all reality, this tank should be just full of algae. But it isn't. So that has to bring you to the question of the anoxic filtration system. I noticed in ponds did the same thing. It did the same thing. Your pond didn't have all this algae and everything in it. It was very clean and clear, and people used to make mention of that. Wow, is your pond clear with the number of fish you have? Well, it's the same thing here. You have a lot of fish, you have clean, clear, the plants are just, yeah, they're nothing special, Harnworth plant, okay, and you got wisteria. But still, people don't want their plants all messed up with brown algae all over them or hair algae all over them. They want a nice, clean environment, especially with goldfish that eat a lot, produce a lot of waste. So I just want to keep you up to date on that. So when you watch my videos, I try to be truthful with you. I just tell you the way it is. I show you pictures. Here's what's going on. But watch these videos. Do yourself a favor. Watch them. They all show you the aquarium either at its precipice, okay, which we all know there's a time when the tank looks its best, and then it starts deteriorating. They don't show you that part. They show you at its precipice, that when it looks its best, like, see how great this is doing? Well, let's see it as it begins to age. And then we'll start seeing all the algae problems starting to, because what happens is everything begins to age and the substrate's beginning to age and it doesn't do the same job. Now on my 90 gallon, it's doing as good as it was at day one, and it's 10 months old. And you will not see algae all over the place. It doesn't exist. Okay, and the plants are growing even more. I have some crypt that are just spreading out all over the place. It's over 10 to 12 inches high already. Some of my crypts in that aquarium, they spread it out and made more babies. That's way tanks are. The moss is covering up all the wood that's in there. So it takes, I'm going to say it takes at least almost a year before your tank is going to finally grow and do what it wants to do. Unless you're going to be one of those hobbies, you're constantly cutting stuff, trimming stuff, replacing plants. You're constantly going to be dealing with that, which I don't want to. I just let nature take its course. So I wanted to bring that up to you. Watch these videos, but think to yourself, how come they're not showing close-ups? Show me a close-up. I don't want to see a tank real far away. I want to see close-ups. I want to see what's going on in your tank. Always demand as a hobbyist to tell these people making these videos, let me see your tank up close. Because from a distance, it looks like there's no algae. I always try to show you my tanks up close so you can see if there is algae or not algae. Okay, thank you for watching, but if you are thinking about distributing CO2 and you want to be more efficient, this is one way of doing it. Like I said, it goes in the tank or in your sump, and it does a very good job. It takes the pressure off the CO2 lines because there is no back pressure. And this, I know, works because I've already used the 400 and this is the 600. So I've been using them for years and years. I wouldn't tell you something if it didn't work. And you're not going to be wasting your money. If you're worried about the noise, it depends on how many bubbles are going to go in there. And a lot of hobbies worry about the noise. I don't understand why, unless the tank is in a family room where you're going to hear that noise and you don't want any noise at all. No, this may not be for you then. But then if you have a 55, 75 gallon or bigger tank, you're going to need something like this to really get the water impregnated with the CO2 correctly. So anyhow, thank you for watching. This is Dr. Novak. Until next time.